Hello, this is Keith Size from the National Honey Board, and on today's Hive session, we're going to be talking about something that I hear about all the time. These are the three big questions I either get from food manufacturers at a trade show or even whenever I talk to my neighbors. It's important to understand how to answer these questions because they're really what everybody wants to talk about whenever you talk about how you work in the honey industry. So, what are those three big questions? First one is honey good for me? Then we've got is honey production good for honeybees? This has become really important as we hear a lot more chatter from some of these synthetic honey companies about how honey production is bad for honeybees. And then the final one is honey good for the planet? We're going to have simple answers for you on all three of these questions as you tune into this presentation. The first one is honey good for me? Yes, by its very nature, honey is such an amazing natural wonder. And there's a few things we can say about honey that really showcase to people how it is such this unique differentiated sweetener. The first thing we can say is that it is truly all natural. I mean, we're talking from the flower to the beehive, straight to the person. We can also talk about the composition of honey. Inside of honey, how there's trace amounts of 7 vitamins, 11 minerals, 5 antioxidants, and 17 amino acids. All these things are there, and they're there naturally. They're not things we're adding to the honey. Consumers understand that honey is kind of unique and differentiated. This was an interesting study from Mintel where they specifically asked which of the following types of sugars and sweeteners do you think is bad for you? And honey ranked the worst, which in this case was good. And then whenever they ask, is honey appealing and natural, honey ranks the best. So consumers understand sort of that difference. And in their own heads, they know how to answer that question, is honey good for me? We should also talk about, whenever that question is asked, about this notion of how honey is made and how compared to other sweeteners, there's this difference and how it gets from either a leaf in the case of stevia or a fruit in the case of monk fruit extract into this powder or ingredient that's able to be used, whether you're a home baker or whether you're a large baking company. Talk about the differences where honey does not have to go through chemical changes. It doesn't need enzymes added to it. All these things are important whenever you talk about how sort of honey is unique and the value of honey. Complexity oftentimes can be considered something that's bad, but in this case, whenever I get asked the question, is honey good for me, I talk about its complexity, about how Mother Nature created the substance that is not just one source of sugar or carbohydrate, but more than 20 different types of sugar. It's got all sorts of minerals, vitamins, enzymes in there as well. 0.5% only, but that's significant whenever you compare it to maybe other sweeteners out there on the market. And the good thing is none of this stuff was added. It was just put in there by the bees. So, second question, is honey production good for honeybees? This is a really important question to start thinking about and have an answer prepared for, because as we start to see more synthetic honeys come out, we're going to see more of the conversation about, is honeybee production, is commercial honey beekeeping, is that good for honeybees? And we have to definitively say, yes, it is. We have to paint the picture of this symbiotic relationship between the beekeeper and the bee that's not only benefiting the bee, but benefiting all of humanity. We've developed some really simple social media graphics that help tell that story. And I think you have to tell it in a story. Consumers respond to story, and it's a really great story to tell. And I think it's all about defining what a honeybee's job is versus what a beekeeper's job is. Honeybees, we talk about them, their job is to make honey. They're also out there pollinating, which is great, but they're making honey. They're bringing food back to their family to feed them. And it's a beekeeper's job to make sure not only that they have a home that's safe, that's dry, that's dark and protected, but they're also healthy and they're near that source of food. So beekeepers have this huge responsibility that without them, honeybees, kind of those feral colonies or wild honeybee colonies, would be struggling even more. We also talk about how beekeepers are like parents. They ensure a hive of bees has plenty of food to eat during the winter, meaning they're not going to take too much food. They also make sure that the bees don't produce too much honey. Now, this may be something that is counterintuitive, but you're going to always get the question, well, aren't you taking the bees' honey? And it's good to have an answer for if we don't sort of extract that excess honey, then the bees could become honeybound. And clearly define to them what honeybound is, about how where there's so much honey in a hive that there's not enough room for the queen to lay eggs. And whenever that happens, it's going to, in the long term, really hamper that hive's ability to collect nectar in the future. So overall, as you tell the story, just talk about how the symbiotic relationship, the harmonious relationship between bees and beekeepers, and how that makes both of them thrive. And then, talk about the excess honey that we have and why it's important for us to take that and how that supplies our food industry and how we're not hurting the bees or taking any food from them, how it's powering the bee industry, the honeybee industry, and the honey industry to continue our research into keeping healthier bees. And then the final question is honey good for the planet? This is an easy one to answer because without honeybees making honey, we wouldn't have, more than 30% of the food we eat. All these things you see here on this screen are the responsibility of honeybee. And it's important to talk about that whenever you talk to consumers. Just share the big facts. Of the world's 115 most important food crops, 87 require pollination. Honeybees are responsible for about 80% of those. That's equals to about a third of the US diet. So every third bite of food most Americans eat is thanks to a honeybee. And that encompasses about $3 trillion worth of agriculture. If the person you're talking to isn't about statistics, just talk about their favorite products. I love apple pie. It's one of my favorite things. And we don't have apple pie without honeybees, not only for the apples, but for the cinnamon and all these other things. So all these amazing apple pies out there, we would no longer have without honeybees. And that's kind of an important angle to take to relay to them kind of some of their favorite foods and talk about how without them we don't have honeybees. And then the final thing is you can just show them a list of all the products that are important. This is something I do a lot whenever I go talk to food manufacturers. I know our food service team does the same whenever they go talk to chefs. You can physically tick down an ingredient deck or a menu and talk about all the products that you no longer going to be able to make without honeybees. So those are some answers to the three biggest questions I think you're going to get about honey and honeybees in the future. If you have any questions that I didn't answer, email me at keith@honey.com. Thank you.